Have you ever wondered how our distant ancestors, small human groups wandering the vast and unforgiving landscapes of the Paleolithic era, managed to protect the most fragile among them? Imagine a world where every day was a battle for survival, where the weak, the infants, and the elders were constantly at risk. How did these tiny communities, with no written language and no modern tools, seek guidance from forces they could not see? What were the messages they left behind, and what did these signals reveal about their understanding of life, death, and divine protection? These are not just stories of survival. They are glimpses into the earliest human attempts to understand the sacred, to communicate with the unseen, and to ensure that even the smallest voices in their group were heard and protected. Life for these groups was precarious. The harsh climate, wild animals, scarcity of food, and constant movement forced humans to develop strategies not just to endure, but to care for one another. Protecting the most vulnerable was not merely a moral choice, but a necessity for the survival of the community itself. Observing the natural world, interpreting patterns in the skies, the behavior of animals, or the echoes of distant sounds, they believed these were divine signs, messages meant to guide and warn them. The rituals they created, the careful placement of stones, the subtle carvings on bone, or the gestures around the fire, all were attempts to engage with these unseen forces. Every act, no matter how small, carried meaning. You might think of these actions as primitive or symbolic, but in reality they were sophisticated forms of communication with the sacred. Each step in their ritual, each offering, was meticulously designed to invoke protection, to appeal to forces greater than themselves. Imagine a tiny hand reaching for guidance, or a frail body shielded by invisible prayers whispered in the shadows of early human dwellings. Every community member understood, in ways we are only beginning to grasp, the vital importance of these acts. And now, here's where it becomes deeply personal. Consider this. What if you could witness these ancient messages for yourself? What insights would you gain about care, survival, and connection to the divine? This is why understanding these practices matters today. They remind us that even in the harshest conditions, humanity sought meaning, safety, and hope. So pause for a moment and reflect. Have you ever experienced a sense of protection or guidance that felt larger than yourself? Fica comigo até o final, because what you are about to discover may surprise you. Don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts or personal experiences. Hit the like button if this resonates, and check if you're already subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. The story of these messages from the past is just beginning, and what comes next will reveal even more about how early humans connected with the sacred and how their wisdom still echoes through time. Life in the small human groups of the Paleolithic era was a delicate balance between survival and adaptation. These early communities were tightly knit, often consisting of just a handful of families, relying on each other for food, protection, and knowledge. Every member played a crucial role, and the smallest misstep could threaten the entire group. The environment was harsh and unforgiving. Frigid winters, scorching summers, unpredictable weather, and predators lurking at every turn. Yet despite these dangers, humans developed remarkable strategies to navigate their world, strategies that combined observation, instinct, and an emerging understanding of social bonds. Daily life was filled with challenges that required cooperation. Hunting large animals demanded coordination, patience, and an almost intuitive understanding of timing and terrain. Gathering plants, fruits, and roots required knowledge passed down through generations, sometimes encoded in ritualistic actions or songs. Every task was performed not in isolation, but as part of a communal effort, and the survival of the group depended on the collective success of these endeavors. Children and elders, the most vulnerable, were never left unattended. Their protection was not optional. It was central to the group's continued existence. In these groups, survival and spirituality were intertwined. Early humans were keen observers of their environment, noticing patterns in the movement of stars, the cycles of the moon, and the behavior of animals. These observations were often interpreted as signs from unseen forces, messages that could guide their decisions or warn of imminent danger. A sudden storm, the migration of prey, or an unusual sound in the night might be perceived as communication from a higher power, prompting actions intended to protect the group, especially its weakest members. Rituals were not just symbolic, they were functional. They created structure, provided comfort, and reinforced social cohesion. The boundaries between the practical and the spiritual were fluid. Tools, artifacts, and even body markings could serve dual purposes, assisting in daily survival while simultaneously acting as conduits for divine guidance. A carefully sharpened spear, a painted stone, or an arranged circle of bones could embody both skill and sacred intention. Through these objects, the community engaged with forces they could not directly see, ensuring that the fragile, children, the injured, and the elderly were safeguarded. This integration of survival, observation, and belief laid the foundation for what would become complex spiritual systems in later societies. Understanding how these small groups navigated danger and nurtured care for their vulnerable provides profound insight into human resilience and ingenuity. Every step they took, every ritual they performed, was a testament to the enduring human instinct to protect, to connect, and to seek guidance beyond the visible. Within these early human communities, the most vulnerable, children, the elderly, and the infirm, were the heart of both care and ritual. Their fragility demanded attention, not only for survival, but as a reflection of the group's cohesion and moral compass. A child's laughter or a frail elder's wisdom was more than life. It was continuity. Protecting them was a practical necessity, but it was also deeply symbolic, intertwining daily survival with emerging spiritual awareness. Every gesture of care carried meaning, an acknowledgement that the survival of the weak mirrored the resilience of the entire group. Children were often observed meticulously, their behavior studied and responded to with both practical and ritualistic actions. Infants might be wrapped in furs or placed in protective enclosures during hunting expeditions, and subtle rituals, chants, gestures, or offerings could accompany these acts, blending the practical with the sacred. Elders, too, held a unique position. Their experience, knowledge of natural cycles, and memory of past hardships made them invaluable guides. Protecting them ensured the continuity of wisdom across generations. The rituals surrounding these vulnerable members were not mere superstition. They were deliberate acts reinforcing the interconnectedness of life and survival. These rituals were infused with meaning. A group might create small shrines, arrange stones in protective patterns, or leave offerings in locations deemed sacred. Each act was intentional, a symbolic bridge between the material world and the forces they perceived as controlling life's fragility. The group's attention to detail, where a stone was placed, how an offering was arranged, reflected a sophisticated understanding of causality, intention, and influence. The act of protection became a dialogue with the divine, a conversation that intertwined life, death, and hope. Interpreting these actions requires understanding the context. These early humans had no written language, yet they communicated through gestures, symbols, and actions that conveyed precise meaning. A particular pattern etched into a bone or a hand-painted image on a cave wall was more than decoration. It was instruction, a message that connected the living to both their ancestors and unseen powers. Protecting the vulnerable was both a moral and strategic imperative, ensuring the group's survival while maintaining spiritual harmony. The emotional resonance of these practices was profound. Caring for the weak created bonds that strengthened social cohesion, reinforced empathy, and nurtured a collective sense of purpose. In a world of constant threat, these small acts of protection were lifelines, both physically and spiritually. They embodied a timeless lesson that the survival of the most fragile was inseparable from the survival of the group itself. The smallest groups of early humans did not leave behind written records, yet their actions spoke volumes about their understanding of the unseen. They watched the sky, the movements of animals, and the subtle shifts in their environment, interpreting these as divine messages. A falling star, the sudden howl of a distant predator, or the unexpected bloom of a plant could all be signs, clues to guide them in protecting those most vulnerable. These observations formed the foundation of early spiritual practices, where the natural world was a mirror of the sacred, and every anomaly demanded attention and response. Messages from the past were embedded in ritualistic behavior. Simple gestures, like placing a stone in a specific pattern, leaving a small offering of food, or performing synchronized movements around a fire, carried layered meaning. They were designed to influence forces beyond human perception, to secure safety, and to communicate respect for life's fragility. Every action reinforced the group's awareness that even the smallest human presence, an infant's cry or the tremor of an aging body, had significance that deserved acknowledgement and protection. These early rituals were not static. They evolved with experience. Observing which actions seemed to bring safety, prosperity, or unexpected outcomes allowed groups to refine their practices. Over generations, these small, repeated acts became codified as messages, a spiritual language that linked the living with the forces they sought to understand. Protecting the weak became a spiritual principle, not only a survival strategy. The most fragile members, in a sense, were conduits through which divine protection was sought, and every careful act reinforced the interconnectedness of life, the sacred, and survival. Consider the emotional depth of this connection. Early humans experienced fear, hope, and awe, and their rituals gave structure to these emotions. By acknowledging signs and responding through deliberate acts, they gained a sense of control in an unpredictable world. The protection of the most vulnerable was thus both practical and deeply spiritual, a reflection of empathy and an acknowledgement that life, in all its forms, was precious. Now, reflect on this. What messages do you think our ancestors were trying to leave behind for us? How do you perceive the signs in your own life that might guide or protect you? Artifacts and ceremonial tools discovered in archaeological sites provide a remarkable window into the spiritual and practical lives of early humans. Each item, from carved bones to painted stones, tells a story of survival intertwined with reverence for forces beyond their comprehension. These objects were not merely functional. They carried symbolic meaning and often played a crucial role in rituals designed to protect the group's most vulnerable members. A carefully shaped tool could serve both for hunting and as a protective talisman, while a painted stone might mark a sacred space where offerings were placed. Every object acted as a bridge between the tangible and the spiritual, ensuring that the actions of the living aligned with unseen forces. The meticulous crafting of these items indicates a level of sophistication in both thought and intention. Bones etched with intricate patterns, shells arranged in deliberate sequences, and pigments carefully applied to cave walls were all evidence of a culture deeply aware of cause and effect. These were not random acts. They were the result of careful observation and an understanding that the right placement, gesture, or object could influence outcomes. Even the smallest artifact could hold significant meaning, acting as a focal point for prayers, gestures, or protective rituals aimed at safeguarding children, elders, and the infirm. Archaeologists suggest that such objects were often passed down through generations, reinforcing communal memory and teaching the young how to engage with the sacred. Each tool or ornament carried the weight of accumulated knowledge, encoding survival strategies and spiritual insights in ways that words alone could not convey. A spear tip with markings, for example, could serve as both a hunting instrument and a symbol of protection, reminding the group of their connection to the unseen and their responsibility to the fragile. These artifacts also reflect the early human understanding of permanence and legacy. By creating objects that could endure beyond a single lifetime, these small groups established continuity, ensuring that knowledge and protective practices were preserved. This attention to detail, precision, and symbolism reveals that even in the harshest conditions, humans sought to communicate, to structure their world, and to engage with powers that they believed could safeguard their community. The presence of these objects demonstrates that early humans were not only pragmatic survivors, but also spiritual strategists, blending practical needs with symbolic action. Each artifact, no matter how small, was part of a larger system of care, protection, and belief, reinforcing the notion that survival was inseparable from the sacred, and that the most vulnerable members of the group were central to the preservation of both life and spiritual harmony. Rituals in these early human communities were not mere superstitions. They were deliberate acts designed to safeguard life, particularly the most vulnerable members of the group. Each gesture, chant, or offering carried intention, blending the physical and spiritual realms in a seamless practice of protection. Around flickering fires, small groups performed synchronized movements, imitating animal behaviors or celestial patterns, believing that these actions would influence unseen forces and ensure safety. The rituals were intricate, combining rhythm, repetition, and symbolism to create a tangible connection between the community and the divine. Fire itself held profound significance. It was both a tool for survival and a conduit for ritual. Flames illuminated sacred objects, casting shadows that became part of the ceremony, while smoke carried offerings and prayers to the unseen. A carefully arranged circle of stones or bones might mark a protective boundary, signaling that the space within was sacred and under the watch of spiritual forces. These acts were deeply purposeful, ensuring that the group's attention was focused on protection, that no vulnerable member was overlooked, and that the community's collective energy was aligned toward survival. Offerings were a central aspect of these rituals. Small portions of food, feathers, or handcrafted objects were placed in specific arrangements, each item symbolizing a prayer or intention. The act of giving, even in its simplest form, demonstrated acknowledgement of forces greater than themselves, reinforcing the belief that protection could be invoked through careful, mindful action. It was a tangible way to negotiate with uncertainty, providing both psychological comfort and a sense of control over an unpredictable environment. These rituals also served as a means of education. Younger members observed, mimicked, and gradually internalized the symbolic language of protection. Through repetition and participation, they learned the importance of attentiveness, empathy, and the sacred responsibility of care. Over time, these practices became deeply embedded in the culture, passed down as both spiritual wisdom and practical knowledge necessary for the survival of the group. The symbolism was layered. A movement of hands, a spoken word, or the placement of a stone was not just ritual. It was a statement of intent, a declaration of care, and a means to communicate with forces believed to influence life and death. These ceremonies remind us that the survival of the weakest was inseparable from the spiritual practices of the community, and that early humans instinctively understood the power of intention, ritual, and symbolism in shaping outcomes. Knowledge in these early human groups was not written down, yet it was carefully preserved and transmitted through observation, imitation, and ritual. The lessons learned about protecting the most vulnerable, children, the elderly, and the infirm, were passed from one generation to the next, not as abstract instructions, but as lived experiences embedded in daily practice. Young members watched elders perform rituals, noticed the placement of stones or offerings, and gradually understood the symbolic language of care. Each repetition strengthened their understanding of what actions mattered, what gestures invoked protection, and how to respond to signs from the natural world. This transmission of knowledge was subtle but profound. By observing the careful attention given to vulnerable members, children internalized both the practical skills and the ethical imperatives of their community. They learned that survival was not only about hunting or gathering, but about empathy, foresight, and attentiveness to the unseen forces guiding life. Even without words, the community ensured continuity. A simple gesture, a repeated chant, or a specific arrangement of objects became a living lesson in care, respect, and spiritual awareness. These practices reinforced group cohesion. Each member, from the youngest to the oldest, understood their role in maintaining balance and safety. Vulnerable individuals were not passive. Their presence demanded engagement, awareness, and action. The rituals, gestures, and teachings created a shared language, a collective understanding that survival and spiritual connection were inseparable. Every action carried meaning. Every observation became guidance, and every ritual was a reminder that the group's well-being depended on the attention given to its weakest members. Reflect for a moment on the implications. Knowledge passed down without words can be as powerful as written instruction. Early humans understood this instinctively. Their careful observation, participation in rituals, and imitation of elders ensured that even subtle lessons about care and protection were never lost. The emphasis on the vulnerable shaped not only survival strategies, but the moral and spiritual framework of the group, leaving an enduring legacy that echoes across millennia. Now, I'd like to hear from you. What do you think these ancient practices can teach us about caring for others today? Leave a comment, sharing your thoughts or experiences, and let's explore together the enduring wisdom of early humans. Your insights matter, and connecting across time can deepen our understanding of protection, empathy, and spiritual awareness. The emotional and psychological dimensions of these early human practices were as significant as the practical and spiritual ones. Living in a world filled with constant threats, from predators to harsh climates, early humans needed more than physical survival strategies. They required a framework for understanding and coping with fear, uncertainty, and vulnerability. Rituals, symbols, and protective gestures provided this framework, offering reassurance that even the smallest or weakest among them could find security within the group. The act of caring, whether through physical protection, ritualized behavior, or symbolic offerings, generated profound emotional bonds that reinforced social cohesion and mutual trust. Empathy was not abstract. It was operational. Caring for infants, the elderly, and the infirm demanded attention to detail, patience, and emotional engagement. When a child stumbled or cried, or when an elder faltered in the harsh terrain, these moments were opportunities to demonstrate vigilance and compassion. Rituals amplified this care, embedding it in a framework that linked emotional responses to deliberate action. Each protective gesture became a signal to the community that life was valued and that the well-being of the vulnerable was inseparable from the group's collective success. These emotional connections also reinforced learning. Observing the reactions of others, noting the consequences of particular actions, and participating in ritualized practices enabled individuals to internalize social and survival norms. Children learned the significance of attentiveness, responsibility, and the ethical importance of safeguarding life. Adults, in turn, found reassurance and purpose in maintaining these practices, as they created a sense of control in an unpredictable environment. The psychological impact of ritualized care fostered resilience, encouraged collaboration, and strengthened the moral fabric of the group. The integration of emotional, spiritual, and practical elements in daily life demonstrates the sophistication of early human cognition. These communities understood that survival depended not only on hunting or gathering, but on emotional intelligence, symbolic awareness, and the ability to interpret signs from the environment. The fragile members of the group, children, elders, and the infirm, were central to this dynamic, serving as focal points for empathy, ritual, and social cohesion. By attending to the emotional needs of the group, early humans created a model of resilience that extended beyond immediate survival. Protection became a holistic practice, integrating body, mind, and spirit. Observing these practices offers us profound insight into human ingenuity. Even in the harshest circumstances, emotional intelligence, ritual, and care for the vulnerable were essential elements of survival and social harmony. As human societies evolved over millennia, the lessons learned by these early small groups left lasting impressions on cultures that followed. While the forms of ritual and symbolism changed, the underlying principles of care, protection, and reverence for the vulnerable endured. Later societies continued to place emphasis on the welfare of children, the elderly, and the infirm, often embedding these values into spiritual and cultural practices. Festivals, offerings, and sacred observances served both social and practical purposes, echoing the strategies of Paleolithic communities. The integration of spiritual awareness with protective behavior became a recurring theme in human development, demonstrating continuity in the human understanding of life's fragility. Comparisons between early and later cultures reveal surprising similarities. In some ancient civilizations, temples, shrines, and sacred spaces were designed to provide both physical and spiritual sanctuary for those in need. Priests or elders mediated between the community and divine forces, much like the informal shamans or ritual practitioners in small Paleolithic groups. The emphasis on safeguarding life, interpreting signs, and performing deliberate actions to invoke protection reflects a shared human instinct, a recognition that the weak and vulnerable are central to the survival and moral health of the community. The symbolic language of protection also evolved. Written scripts, hieroglyphs, and early forms of art preserved knowledge that once existed only in gestures and ritualized behavior. Even as human societies expanded in size and complexity, the core principle remained the same: attentive care for the fragile, guided by both observation and spiritual understanding, ensured cohesion and continuity. Each act of protection was more than functional. It was a reaffirmation of the community's values and its connection to forces greater than itself. These parallels suggest that the early humans' practices were not isolated curiosities, but foundational elements of human culture. The strategies they developed, balancing observation, ritual, empathy, and symbolic communication, provided a blueprint that resonated through generations. By understanding these connections, we gain insight into the enduring human drive to protect, to interpret the unseen, and to find meaning in the vulnerability of life. Even today, these ancestral principles remain relevant. They remind us that care for the vulnerable is not only a moral imperative, but also a social necessity, deeply intertwined with our understanding of spiritual, emotional, and communal well-being. Observing the threads that connect past and present, we can see how early practices of protection and ritual continue to inform the ways humans create bonds, establish trust, and navigate the complex interplay between survival and meaning. As we reflect on the journey of these early humans, it becomes clear that their understanding of protection, ritual, and care for the most fragile was far more sophisticated than it may initially appear. Through careful observation, ritualized behavior, and symbolic communication, they created a system that ensured the survival of their children, elders, and infirm, while maintaining spiritual harmony and social cohesion. Every gesture, offering, and carefully arranged object carried meaning, demonstrating that even in the harshest conditions, humans instinctively sought connection, guidance, and protection from forces beyond their immediate perception. These lessons echo across time. Modern societies may differ in scale, technology, and complexity, but the core principles remain surprisingly relevant. We still seek ways to safeguard those who are vulnerable, to understand signs that guide us, and to create rituals, whether through shared traditions, ceremonies, or symbolic acts that strengthen community bonds and offer comfort in uncertainty. The ancient practices remind us that attention, empathy, and deliberate action are timeless tools for survival and social cohesion. Moreover, these messages from the past serve as a mirror for our present. They challenge us to consider how we honor the fragile and how we create meaning through intention and care. The seemingly small acts of protection, watching over a child, tending to an elder, creating a safe environment, carry profound significance. They are echoes of a lineage of human thought and ritual, stretching back tens of thousands of years, illustrating that the well-being of the most vulnerable is inseparable from the vitality and spiritual health of the entire community. If this exploration of ancient wisdom has resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on your own connection to care, protection, and community. Consider leaving a comment to share that you reached the end, perhaps saying something like, "This message was for me," or "I'm with you until the end." If you found value in this journey, naturally click the like button and ensure you're subscribed so you can continue exploring the profound lessons of humanity's earliest communities. There is a video here that complements this one perfectly. Click and continue the journey, discovering more about how the past shapes our understanding of life, care, and spiritual connection. Through these ancient practices, the message is clear. Survival is not merely physical, and life is not only measured in days or years. True resilience emerges from understanding, empathy, and the sacred responsibility we hold toward one another, especially the most fragile among us. By embracing these lessons, we continue a conversation that began tens of thousands of years ago, connecting past and present in a timeless exploration of human ingenuity and care.